Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to C4C. So many of you know, or some of you may know, that I'm studying through the book of First John, as well as doing a topical study on what is regeneration. What does it mean that we're regenerated? What does it mean that we're to put on the new man? 2 Corinthians 5:17. What does Paul mean when he says old things are passed away and all things become new? So I'm doing a deep dive in a lot of these different areas, and so I figured today I'd let you know some thoughts I had as I was going through the book of First John. So one of the things I do when I'm doing a verse by verse study of a particular book of the Bible is I'll read the book over and over and over a few different times, sort of read the letter as a whole. If it's a letter, if it's an epistle, whatever the case is, and that's what I was doing with First John. And by doing that, you get a fuller understanding, a fuller context on why he wrote that particular letter, what were the issues that he was addressing, and things of that nature. But not only that, reading through the letter over and over, at one sitting allows you to identify some key words, some words that the author, in this instance, the Apostle John, some key words that he uses on a somewhat frequent basis. And so when I am studying through this First John, I came up with numerous words that he uses over and over. The one word that it seems like he uses the most is the word love, and it's the Greek agape. He uses the word sin or sins very often. Agape is used 33 times. Sin or hamartia is used 27 times. Gnosko for know is 25. Meno for abide or remain is 23. Ido, which is another word for know, is 15. Adelphos, which is brother, uses 13 times. Aletheia, he uses 9 times, which means truth. And one thing that I really focused on and zeroed in on is the Greek word teknon. Teknon. Now, with this word teknon, he only uses it 5 times. But I think this word is very important to understand a particular verse within the book of First John. And so he uses it 5 times, numerous places, mainly in chapter 3 and then again in chapter 5. But I want to go ahead and explain this Greek word teknon, and basically what does this have to do with First John. And so if you haven't heard it yet from the Lordshippers or conditionalists, you probably will hear it soon enough. The more conditionalists and Lordshippers you get to know, the more you'll hear this argument come up. And the argument comes from 1 John chapter 3, verse number 10. John writes, "In this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. Whosoever doeth not righteousness is not of God, neither he that loveth not his brother." And so the argument goes that in verse number 10 in the 3rd chapter of 1 John, John's saying that the children of God and the children of the devil are manifested by whoever does not do or practice righteousness. And those that don't practice righteousness, they're not children of God. They're not believers. They're actually unbelievers. They're considered children of the devil. That's often how Lordshippers and conditionalists will argue and articulate this verse, Calvinists as well. But in this verse, when John writes in this, the children of God and the children of the devil, the Greek word for children is teknon. And this is the word I want to talk about a little bit today. So, with this word in 1 John, is translated as sons or children. And when we're looking in the BDAG lexicon, we see that it carries actually a wide range of meanings. And so there's numerous definitions for this word. And teknon can mean an offspring of parents, like I'm the child of Randy and Debbie, my parents. It can be in reference to descendants of the same nationality, like children of Israel, children of America. It could be in reference to a spiritual child, one that's a believer in Christ and they've been positionally justified, or like Paul calls Timothy, a child in the faith, and others as well. And so someone maybe you have led to Christ. It can be used in reference to one who is dear to another without genetic relationship. those who exhibit characteristics of transcendent entities. And so BDAG explains this can be used as those who exhibit characteristics of transcendent entities. It can be used in regards to inhabitants of a city and persons with a specific characteristic. And so it's out of the range of meanings, it's interesting because John, the Apostle John, not only in 1 John, but also in his gospel and in the 2nd and 3rd John, he uses the Greek word teknon for children or sons 12 times in 5 different ways. And so what's the big deal with that? So what? Well, when you're reading a letter from a particular biblical author, out of a range of meanings that a Greek word can actually carry, if the biblical author uses it really the same way most of the time, then in that one instance where we're unsure what range of meaning definition he's using, most often it's probably that he's using it the same way he's been using the entire time. However, because the Apostle John in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and in the Gospel of John uses teknon 12 times in 5 completely different ways, it's interesting that he's using it being defined differently. So there's not one primary meaning he's using, but he's using it in various senses. And what also is interesting is in 1 John chapter number 3. 1 John chapter number 3, he uses this Greek word teknon in verse 2 and in verse 10. And so you might be thinking at that point, so what? Well, as my pastor, Pastor Ken, always tells me, you got to tell people why they should care about what you're talking about. Well, I'll let you know why, so what? See, in verse number 2, John's being emphatic. John is stating clearly that to those whom he's writing to, that they are the sons of God. They are the teknon of God. And we see this in 1 John 3:2, where John writes, Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And so John makes no mistake. He says to the audience of his letter, those people, they are sons, teknon, of God. They are the spiritual children. They have believed in Christ and therefore received everlasting life. Then he says and he promises that when Christ appears, we will be like him. There's no possibility about that. It's not a hope or a potentiality. It's a statement of fact. And so here in verse number 2 of chapter number 3, John is using teknon as a spiritual child. But then when you jump down to verse number 10 of the same chapter, John writes that one's righteousness will reveal whether one is a child or teknon of God or the devil. And we read this verse and it says, in this, the children or teknon of God are manifested, and the children teknon of the devil. Whosoever doeth not righteousness is not of God, neither he that loveth not his brother. And so this is where Calvinists, Lordshippers, conditionalists, they'll see it and say, it says, in this, the children of God, children of the devil are manifested. Whoever doesn't do righteousness is not of God. And so if they're not of God, then they're clearly not saved. And that's the argument that's made. So if John uses teknon in verse number 2 of chapter 3, emphatically stating that you are a child of God, and when Christ comes back, we will be like him. But then in verse number 10 here, is John contradicting himself when he tells them clearly that they are sons of God? Or is John giving them a false sense of assurance of their justification with God, as he later says that one's righteousness will declare whether they're a child of God or a child of the devil? So is he giving them a false sense of assurance? Or are the conditionalists and Lordshippers and Calvinists right that if a believer doesn't practice righteousness, then they're not genuinely saved? Is it one of those? And I would argue that neither of those answers are correct. Neither of those positions are correct. John isn't contradicting himself. John is not giving them a false sense of assurance of their justification. And John is not confirming what Lordshippers and others are arguing. And that's why this Greek word teknon is important. And that's why understanding that John uses teknon 12 times in 5 completely different ways. Because there's no primary definition John is attached to primarily using this word in all his different letters. And so when we look at this, we see in 1 John 3:2, John is using this word teknon in reference to them being a spiritual child, their relationship with God through faith alone in the gospel. But then he gets to 1 John chapter number 3, verse number 10. He uses the word teknon again in reference to those who exhibit the characteristics of transcendent entities. Remember, that was one of the definitions within the range of meanings of this Greek word. And so specifically, he's talking about the characteristics that one is portraying of either God or the devil. He's not saying that they are unsaved and they are, spiritual children of the devil because they're unsaved and they're doing his bidding. He is saying, within the semantic range of the Greek word teknon, that when they are not practicing righteousness, when they are not doing righteousness or committing righteousness, then they have characteristics of the devil. So John's not contradicting himself, and he's not giving his audience a false assurance. Instead, he is simply telling them that they can tell who is not abiding in Christ by how they are living their life. And in 1 John chapter 2, verse number 6, the chapter before, he says, if we say we're abiding in Christ, we ought to walk as he walked. And so if they're abiding in Christ, their life will be characterized by the qualities and characteristics of God. But if they are not abiding, their life will be characterized by the devil and how he works. And this makes actually complete sense, especially when we recall that Jesus called Peter Satan in Matthew 16:23. And Jesus called Peter Satan. Why? Because when Jesus talked about going to the cross and being arrested and persecuted, Peter said, no, I won't let it happen. And so Jesus called Peter Satan, or adversary, because he was not abiding in the truth of Christ. And Peter was seeking an earthly solution rather than the will of God. And also interesting, in the same passage in 1 John chapter 3, John says that when we abide in Christ, we will not sin. And in 1 John 3:6, he said, whosoever abideth in him sinneth not. And so the key to not sinning is abiding in Christ. That's it. If you don't want to sin, abide in Christ. But I know that's easier said than done. The problem is that we don't abide in Christ perfectly, and we don't abide in Christ regularly, unfortunately. That's why there's regular admonition in the New Testament by many different biblical authors that we should, as believers, continuously walk in the Spirit, to abide in Christ, to put on the new man, as well as negative commands like, put off from you a lying tongue and evil and malice and things of this nature. And so the key in 1 John chapter 3, with this Greek word teknon, meaning sons or children, is realizing in verse number 2, John uses it one way to say that they are believers and children of God by positional justification. And in verse 10, he's using teknon as children of God or children of the devil, that if one is not working righteousness, then they are living as if they were the devil with the same characteristics of Satan. And so that's simply what John is saying. In understanding this word and how John uses it, it brings a lot of light to this particular passage. So I just encourage you, the next time a Pharisee comes your way and they want to quote 1 John 3:8 and 10, trying to say to you or trying to say to somebody else that, you're not a genuine believer because you're doing X, Y, or Z. Hopefully you can recall this podcast and you can recall the word teknon and how John uses it, so that you'll be better prepared to defend a faith alone in Christ alone gospel message. And so there's more that I can say on this study on the letter of 1 John. But again, I'm still going through it. I've been in it about a week or two right now. And there's other fascinating words that he's using. But soon enough, we're going to do a verse-by-verse video on it, hopefully. And then we can break it down from the letter perspective overall. Just remember that many people commit what's known as the illegitimate identity transfer. The illegitimate identity transfer is taking one meaning of a particular word within the semantic range, and there can be multiple definitions, but they're taking one meaning and they're applying that one meaning everywhere they're seeing this word. And so they're illegitimately identifying that meaning with that word, divorced of the context and the possible other definitions that are used. And so be aware this illegitimate identity transfer is something that happens fairly regularly. We commit it sometimes also. And so be cautious of that. And so I hope this quick audio was beneficial and uplifting and encouraging and at least insightful. And so again, 1 John 3:10, if we are abiding, we will have the characteristics of God in our life manifested to others. If we are not abiding, we're going to have the characteristics of the devil manifested to others. Doesn't mean we're saved or not saved. It's just revealing the fact on whether we are looking more like Christ or looking more like the devil. And I'd hope and encourage all of us that name the name of Christ that we would want to look more like Christ, so that if we are saying we love him, we should keep his commandments. And because he's done so much for us, how can we do so little for him? And so, don't forget teknon, one of the Greek words, very important in this letter. And don't forget, like, comment, share, subscribe, all those other good things. And until next time, God bless.